Hi, I'm Suzanne Ehlers, and this is Not Really Strangers, the podcast where we explore just how connected the refugee experience is to our everyday lives and to the social issues that matter most to us. Thanks for joining us for another conversation with a brand new guest, here to share the story of how they came to realize that their story and the refugee story were intertwined. By the end of this episode, you'll see that in this global community, the distance between us is often much shorter than we think. Let's dive in. Our guest today is Kristin Davis, actor and Goodwill Ambassador for UNHCR, the UN's refugee agency. And here we are. Kristin Davis, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, Suzanne. It's exciting. I like to be on other people's podcasts.
That's right. It's like both sides of the microphone. You know how this works. I'm going to say for our listening audience that you have a long and storied affiliation with the UN Refugee Agency. So I'm going to start just on a note of gratitude for all the places that you visited, all the stories that you've helped us tell.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm incredibly lucky to get to be involved in any way.
Will you tell our listeners how this issue of refugees and UNHCR and forced displacement, how did it ever get on your radar screen? And how are we so lucky to have you as a GWA?
You're so sweet. Well, there's a woman named Claire Lewis who works in the Goodwill Ambassador area of UNHCR, and I've known her a very long time. And I met her at the Chateau Marmont in Hollywood at a very Hollywood party, probably 25 years ago, maybe a long time ago. And she was there with the Kenya's girl choir or child choir. It was a George Clooney event. We were in a party where you couldn't move. It was like very, very populated with people in our industry. And I was smushed up against her, which ended up to be a great thing. It's one of those serendipitous meetings.
Yeah.
And I had just been to my first trip to Kenya and Tanzania as a tourist, very much a tourist safari type of a trip. I love wildlife. And when I was there, especially in Tanzania, I kept seeing people like coming to the market or walking around in the villages, and they didn't really look like they were thriving. And so I would ask my driver, like, what's going on with these people? Are they okay? And he'd say, yes, they're fine. And I say, but, they don't look well. What's going on? Are they healthy or do they have health care? And he was like, oh, yes, everything's fine. Don't worry. So the whole time I was there, I couldn't ever get really like a straight answer to what was going on there, because I think they didn't want they thought they were going to upset the tourist experience, right?
Yeah.
So it was really on my mind when I got home, like, what is really going on there and how do I find out? So it seemed very strange, right? So when I happened to be smushed up against the corner wall at the chateau and Claire was there, and I said, I was just in Tanzania and, it seems like there's a lot going on and, no one would really tell me. And, I'd just love to be able to learn more. And she said, oh, yes. If you ever want to travel, you can come with us. And I said, where do you need me? And what we ended up doing, which was really wonderful, was we created our own kind of program where we were really primarily focused on women's livelihoods and bringing the opportunity for women in remote villages in different places, largely on the African continent, to be able to learn skills and have access to a livelihood so that they could be more independent and provide for their children in a more substantial way, which is what all the women that we ever met want to do. And we had the best time traveling around and doing this up until about 2011. And we were in Tanzania. In 2011, there was a famine. There was a drought on the Horn of Africa. And we happened to be in Tanzania again with this incredible livelihood program that was helping these widows farm on these intense mountainsides. And these women would just climb, and they had like 12 different crops that they were rotating. And it was very inspiring and a very much of a feel-good story. So we're in Tanzania, and Claire starts getting these texts that the situation in the Horn of Africa is dire and that people are flooding into Dadaab, the, at the time, largest refugee camp that existed, and that it was really bad because the aid workers there couldn't keep up with the influx of people. And I said, we're right here in Tanzania. We should go up there. And she was like, no, we have to have permits and whatnot. And I was like, we have to go up there. So we get up there. And we had a videographer and a photographer with us for our other job. And so we got there. And of course, I had never been to the job. I was so shocked, and the size of it, the drought was really bad at that point. People were walking from Somalia with literally nothing, like tatters. Their clothes would be stolen on the way. Like, it was so extreme. You'd see one woman with about 10 children. They weren't all her children, but she had collected them on the way. We saw so many really, really, really hard things, but also really beautiful things. So because they were trying to register everybody so that they could get the services and also keep track of who had come into the camp, they couldn't keep up with the influx. So people were having to wait outside the camp gates.
Okay.
And they were in such bad shape that at times the people inside working in the camp were worried that they weren't going to make it till the next day. It was so bad. I'm going to cry thinking about it. So everyone in the camp was bringing things out to the people, all the UNHCR workers, all of Oxfam, and Doctors Without Borders, everyone who was working there, all the different NGOs were just bringing supplies out to the people. And I thought to myself, like, this is incredible. And I had also learned by that point, I think from visiting different places already, of the organizational skills of UNHCR in terms of running the camps, which is something that I don't think a lot of people realize, right? So, number one, the organization is incredible. It's like running cities,
Yeah.
and no one would be able to organize all of the other NGOs if UNHCR wasn't in charge of that. So I thought that my thought at the time was that I wanted to go to the source of who was really, really 100% committed to people who had to flee in emergencies. And that, of course, is UNHCR. So Claire and I happened to both end up at UNHCR because I wanted to be at the, like the crux of the issue. You know what I'm saying? And in 2011, that was when the numbers of people who were displaced really started to rise. And I thought to myself, this is really, really serious, and it's going to get more serious. And we have to make sure that we are there and able to provide this support. So that's where I want to put my efforts.
And lucky for us, lucky for UNHCR, and what as I said earlier, a long tenure that you've had with us. And so this trip that you've just described, you've gone on and done many other travels with UNHCR and have been probably at the gates of many different kinds of refugee camps and experiences. I love the story. I mean, just the curiosity, that you showed being a tourist and sort of not trusting the answer that you were being given, really wanting to better understand the circumstance. Of course, I have met Claire Lewis, so I love the idea of finding her at a party and saying,
right?
I want to do more of this. And she's right. We do need champions like you everywhere. And I think we'll talk a little bit based on your recent travel about the circumstance for women and girls and this idea of livelihoods. And so maybe I'll sort of set the stage a little bit for this recent trip to South Sudan. And you met many individuals who have fled horrific violence in Sudan. And for listeners who don't know, it's currently the world's largest displacement crisis. It's millions of people who have been forced to leave their homes. And it is sadly among one of the least funded emergencies and crises in the world. So a scale that seems unimaginable, and then unfortunately funding constraints that have gone to shut down a lot of services. And I think one of the ones that you bore witness to is how much funding we have lost for services for women and girls, for safe spaces. And it's hard to wrap our head around that for those of us who haven't been on the front lines of that. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned and heard from the women that you met there, and how much this sort of really, kind of headline issue of funding constraints, what it looks like at the human level?
Well, I mean, it's really so sad and kind of shocking when you actually see it, because it's one thing to hear about the funding cuts, and then it's another thing to be there. I think people think about the food and the shelter, which of course are hugely important, but many times in these situations, the most vulnerable people are the girls and the mothers in general, because the mothers are usually on their own trying to, keep their children alive. And it's a very vulnerable position to be in when you don't have anything. You had to flee without anything. Your husband may or may not have been killed and or kidnapped. You may not know what happened to them. You may not know if they're alive or dead. You have no idea. And you may not have any way to contact them. I mean, I can't, almost every single story involved the fact that either their husband was shot in front of them or taken and they don't know what happened to him. So what a horrible situation to be in. And in South Sudan, because unfortunately sexual violence is being used as a tool of the war, which I think people have written about, but I don't know if people really understand how prevalent and horrible it is. We heard some stories, it's like one story would be bad enough, but when you literally are hearing different versions of the same story on and on, you realize how organized the tactics are. And it's heartbreaking just as people, as human beings, that we do this to each other. We had two really, really interesting experiences in South Sudan where we got to see two different versions of a safe space that had still been funded. So we've had to close 3 out of 4 in this area, which is really so sad because it's in one case it's called Girls Shine, and it was near Juba. And the thing that was beautiful there was that these were like teen age girls, and their parents had kind of gotten together to start this organization called Girls Shine. And it was to create a safe space for the girls to be able to go there and learn English, learn how to write English, and learn how to talk about the issues that were important to them. And how, when we walked in, they had these refugee stories of other people that they were reading. And in the refugee story, there'd be like a dilemma that a girl had, like how to talk to my parents about my menstrual cycle. The teacher would say, like, well, what would you do? And she'd ask one girl, and they'd raise their hands and they'd speak like so beautifully and so intelligently. And one talked about how through Girls Shine and learning about her menstrual cycle and learning how to talk to her parents, that now her father is like her best friend. And she goes to her father to talk to him. I mean, in ways, and I have a 14-year-old, right? So for me, I'm like, this is incredible communicating. And
Yeah.
I need some of these skills. And one girl, so sweet. And they're all just so, some of them were shy, but they're coming out of their shells, to be able to kind of take part in the class. And this one girl so sweetly was talking about losing her mother, and that she had really felt alone since then. And that because she was at Girl Shine, she didn't feel so alone.
Mm.
So it's so sweet. And you really think about the fact that this is changing these girls' lives forever.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
having this safe space where they can be together and kind of realize what their rights are. They talked a lot about not being forced into early marriage. They talked about, things that you would think weren't still an issue in the world, but they are. And it was so incredible to see these young women really understanding, like, I have a voice, I can speak up, I can change my fate. Like these things, it's powerful. It's very, very powerful. So the fact that we were having to close 3 out of 4, really, really sad. Then the second one that we saw, a similar space. This was not in Juba. It was closer up towards Renk, where we went to, where the refugees are actually coming across the border. And these were women from Sudan, and they had all fled Sudan to stay safe from the fighting. And they had all formed this group where they met. They had a place that they could meet. They were learning crafts, so they were doing beading and making quilts. And so they would be there doing the crafts, and they would also talk about what they went through. So each one of them told us their stories, each story horrific. And each one of them talked about how the fact that they had a place where they could go and talk about their stories lightened it for them, lightened the load for them. And you think about mental health care, and, there were no specific mental health care people there because it was kind of out in the country, but yet they're providing that for each other.
Right. Right.
So it was really beautiful and really sad to think about the ones that we can no longer fund because we don't have the money.
And how, I mean, talk about like what is really like the simplest of interventions. There's a woman that comes to mind, Judith Bruce. She's a long-term kind of gender and feminist studies researcher, and she had done a lot of work in India, and she said exactly what you've just articulated, that when you interview, and these are girls not even living in crisis, this is just girls in rural poverty in India, and the only thing they want, not the only thing they want, but one of the most important is a space to be together and to be safe, to like trade ideas and to hear from each other and what's your challenge with your parents. And this is what, just this idea that like a room where they are secure and able to interact with each other, hear from each other's lessons. I just, it's so low tech of an intervention and yet so life transforming for some of the girls. And then also the women in the second story that are, sort of trading stories over skills. It's amazing to me that we couldn't, as a human race, figure out the resource allocation to have spaces like that available for everybody who needs them.
I agree. But I also think that again, it's not something where it's obvious to everyone how important it is. And I think
Right.
that in this case, the thing that really, really shook me was that, I mean, they're not able to serve them a meal when they cross the border.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is the first time I've ever seen that. I have not been to any camp where we weren't serving hot meals. And obviously, we work in conjunction with the World Food Program, and they've had cuts, and we've had cuts. And I mean, I'm still laying in bed at night thinking about it. But that's part of the reason that I went is because I don't think people know. I don't think people understand that number one, this crisis is still happening, right? People are still coming across the border now because the fighting hasn't ended, right?
Right.
I think people wish, in their mind, this one's done or whatever. It's not done. All the people are not safe, right? They're still coming. And number two, the cuts are horrifically extreme. Like the cuts are not just like, oh, there's a little something missing. The cuts are that when families come across the border, which is when I say families, what I mean is women with many, many children.
Right.
The only people who get any food are children under 5, and they get a biscuit in a wrapper. They get a high protein biscuit or whatever they're called, high calorie biscuit in a wrapper. It's like, oh my God. So you don't even know what this woman has been through to get these children here. And it takes a long time. Some of them are coming from northern South Sudan, right? All the way down to get across the border, going through woods and having to hide and getting robbed and all kinds of horrible things, sexual assault, probably like horrible, horrible things. And then they probably have seen their brothers, husbands, fathers shot, and then having to go, and we can't give them food. It's very, very upsetting.
Yeah. I remember going to work in Western Ethiopia. So at the beginning of the Sudanese crisis and people coming across the border into Ethiopia, also difficulties with food rations and enough resources to go around. And remembering that these were people who, like you say, had been sometimes on sort of dirt, gravelly roads without a change of clothes for days at a time, literally collecting family and kids and young people as they go. And when you are food insecure, you can't do anything else. You're not going to your livelihood program during the day if you hadn't had a meal in more than a day or so. And so I just remember how so much of the activity and the energy of the camp kind of ground to a halt, where people are simply not able to thrive when their basic needs are not being met. And I also appreciate you said earlier about UNHCR, that it really is this sort of convening authority in so many of these emergency situations. So partnering, of course, with groups like the World Food Program and other NGO partners on the sort of local level, UNHCR is really seen as the kind of the ultimate sort of convener and organizer so that those services can all be made available. But in times of funding scarcity, we're seeing so much be pulled back. And I just appreciate the human face that you're putting on some of those stories, because I think you're right. I think many people really don't understand how drastic it's been and how truly life or death it is for many people.
Especially in the Sudan situation, because what has happened there is that they don't have their normal resources for food. Then
Right.
their like waivers, or what do they call it? Like
Like a voucher, maybe a
yes,
voucher
like a
or
voucher in
yeah.
Sudan, but that's only if the people who have the power want to give you food, right? So the people who are having to flee, they're not getting food at home. That's part of why they're fleeing. They're also fleeing because people are coming and shooting them, right? So you've got multiple problems. So they're already hungry when they leave. It's not like
Yeah.
they're leaving from like their normal
A
home
normal,
with
right.
all of their things, right? And we did meet this one woman. I could look up her name. So great. She had come, I think, earlier in the year with her, I believe, 4 children. I'm going to look it up so I don't mess it up. And she had started a little tea shop. She'd started a little cafe across from one of the, they've started some new camps because this situation is going on longer than they expected. And so South Sudan had given more land. Again, very remote, very dry. There's literally nothing there. There's no water, there's no electricity, there's nothing, right? And then this woman, hold on, we're going to come to her name. Jacqueline. Jacqueline has just done such a beautiful job. She had to move. She'd been displaced 3 times through this ongoing conflict in the region. And she had come to South Sudan this last time and decided, I am going to make this my home. I am going to start a business so that I can provide for my children. And she had this adorable little cafe, tea shop. And she
Mm,
just, there, and she had gotten to hire someone. She was very excited to hire someone else to help her. Like it had been doing so well. And when you see those stories, you're reminded of the resourcefulness that people in this situation have. And it also reminds me sometimes when you hear the political talk about refugees, how completely misguided it is.
100%.
Refugees want to work
Yep.
so much more than anyone I have ever met in my life. They're willing
Agreed.
to do anything to be able to work and feed their families. That is what they care about. They want to make the community better. They understand what community means. They've been displaced from their community. Like, who else appreciates community more? They want to give. They want to participate. I mean, they're just so different than if you never met anyone in that situation, if you allowed people to draw the picture that they draw.
Yeah,
It's just so opposite of what I've
I agreed.
encountered.
100%. And that idea of Jacqueline's tea shop, I often think when I see, how she's able to create a space like that in the middle of such a punishing environment with so few resources, I'm always like, what could she do if she were, given access to capital and she were at female entrepreneurship conferences? Like, I think of how much potential it may be untapped or at least under tapped. I want to ask a question that takes us a little bit back to the name of the podcast, Not Really Strangers. And you've been kind of talking about this just because you're such a curious and people-centered person yourself. What does it mean to you to be a stranger? What does stranger conjure up for you, given all the places you've traveled and all the strangers that you've met?
I feel like people are very open and generous. I don't know if that's true, but it's been my experience.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's all about how you move in the world, and if you can come with openness and or curiosity, as you said, then there are no strangers. No one's a stranger. I don't really think I can't remember. I'm trying to think of a time I felt like a stranger, and I can't really think of one. I don't know if it's not helping your
Well,
question
no, I
there.
mean, it is, but that answer is the answer, right? It's
Okay.
almost as if like you can't even put your head around the concept of being a stranger. In every place where you've gone, you've been so welcomed and there has been such an openness. So it's this idea that like there's not much between us as humans, really.
No. No.
It's such a universal thread. And if you show curiosity and this open heart, I don't know. I too, I kind of like trying to wrap my head around the concept of stranger almost becomes sort of meaningless because we are in this shared human struggle together.
Definitely, most definitely,
Yeah.
most definitely. And that's
Yeah.
important to remember. I guess the the thing that I think the thing that I'm always reminded of when I come back from a trip is that I feel like in our Western world, what we struggle with is like the bubble, being in the bubble of your life and kind of forgetting like your life obviously we're trying to do the best by our children and our, jobs and whatever different things that we care about. But, you forget sometimes about everything going on out there, and you can get kind of myopically focused in your day-to-day details. I think that's, a danger, because then you're not actively participating in the bigger picture. And I think everyone has different ways that they participate. But humanitarianism is something different than politics. And I think that's really important to think about. Like, can you somehow think about people in a way that's not about the politics, just about helping the people? The bigger political questions don't really matter. What matters is that these people have nowhere to go. They have nothing to eat. They have left everything behind. They have witnessed incredible violence and horror, and we want to be there for them. That's what matters. And they want to get their feet back on the ground, and provide for their family. That's what they want to do. So isn't it in everyone's best interest to help them? I think it is.
I feel like it's such a privilege that in this moment, my day job is to raise awareness around this, to sort of say, like, there's a lot happening and I could feel helpless in the face of it, or I can be making these travels, I can be hearing these stories firsthand, I can be raising people's awareness because everyone has a role to play.
Yes, yes. I mean, the other thing is just they have this strong, strong desire to change their lives.
Yep.
And I just really want to help them do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I always end with, Kristin, I end with one question that's not as much refugee related, but
Okay.
but it's about setting the table for these strangers that we've talked about. And I'm a foodie. My husband's a great cook. I love to have people over. So this idea that, like, when we break bread together, we really do become companions, right? We sort of we get rid of this distance between us as strangers. And so I'm wondering, if you were hosting a dream dinner party, what would be the spread that you would put out for a table of your allies and friends in this work?
Wow. Okay. Oh gosh. That's a big question. Well, I think I'd call my mom, okay,
Oh,
because she's a
that's
really
the
good
right answer.
cook.
Right
Okay,
answer.
great. And she's a good entertainer. I think just comfort food, where I'm Southern, I love, fried chicken. And I think a good comfort food, like my son loves corn on the
Mm,
cob, that would be fun. I mean, I think that sometimes part of the fun when you do get people together is the experience of eating, right? So if it's something that, like, you get to touch and feel like that's, like, gets people relaxed, so that
yep,
it's not
agreed.
too, like, formal. Um, I don't know. I love desserts. I'd love to have pie. I love to make apple pie. Yeah, it's hard to make it, but it's so worth it. I love that. I love chocolate chip cookies. I mean, you can tell I like eat with my children a lot. This is not very gourmet, but I think if I could do anything, that's what I would want to do, because I think it. I think sometimes also it's nice to remind people of kind of their childhood food.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you had me at, I would call my mom, because that's probably what I would do too. I'm like, moms always
Right?
have good advice. And it's funny, I've asked this question now to every guest who's come on the show, and almost all of the answers are in some way about this, like, interacting with the table, passing dishes, family style, like a tactile experience. So I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a real lesson in there of, like, literally breaking back. Like, what does it mean to be around a table and to share in nourishment together, which of course is
Mm-hmm.
also
Mm-hmm.
something you've talked about in places where there's too little opportunity for that nourishment.
Thank you. I think when I think back, like, I really, really have been so stressed about this funding situation and the food.
Yeah,
And I just
yeah,
keep thinking, like,
yeah,
it's interesting just from a perspective of going on all of the trips I've gone on. It was always there. It never entered my mind that it wouldn't be there. And it was such a missing part. Like, these families would come, and there's no meal. Like, it was like a central part of the experience. Like, you want them to feel like, yes, we've got you. Here's food. It's important. But to give them a little biscuit in a wrapper, oh, it's just like
yeah.
really upsetting.
Yeah, that one's a hard one to hear, especially with the children. It's like so key to, again, a sense of safety and restoration, especially after what people have fled and the journeys that they've made. I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my UNHCR heart for really putting a human face on what I think many people will probably never witness firsthand as you have. And you've painted a beautiful and also really powerful picture. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thanks for having me and having such a good conversation. It always feels good to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad. I really appreciate you led the conversation. I can tell you're a podcast host because you had so many stories at the ready. So it's been a pleasure. Thanks, Kristin.
And thank you. Thank you for all you're doing.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. We're in this together.
We are. Definitely.
Thanks so much for listening. Your time is valuable, and it means a lot that you've chosen to spend it here. You can find today's show notes, including how to connect with today's guest, at unrefugees.org/notreallystrangers. That's UNREFUGEES.org/notreallystrangers. While you're there, I hope you'll consider making a donation to the organization I lead, USA for UNHCR, to help us provide more support for refugees here in the US and around the world. If this episode was impactful, please take a moment to review the show and share the episode with a friend or family member. This small action will help us have a much bigger impact. Thanks so much. Don't be a stranger.